If you're waiting for her to reach out, you may be watching the wrong moment. The decision doesn't begin when she types. It begins when her emotional balance quietly shifts. Before contact returns, certainty fades, control loosens, and something internal starts to realign. That's the subtle shift most men never see. In this video, we'll break down what happens before she reaches out again, and why staying calm, detached, and steady often does more than explanations, reassurance, or chasing ever could. If this resonates with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it. Number 1. Silence stops feeling empty. At the beginning, silence doesn't feel powerful. It feels awkward. It feels unfinished, like a sentence cut off mid-thought. You wake up and notice the absence immediately. No messages, no updates, no emotional signal to orient yourself around. And your mind, conditioned by constant interaction, tries to label that absence as loss, as if something valuable has been taken away, as if silence means you're falling behind while life continues elsewhere. But this is only the first layer. Silence feels empty at first because your nervous system is still expecting stimulation. For a long time, your emotional rhythm was shaped by responses, replies, reactions, shifts in tone. Even uncertainty kept you engaged. It gave your mind something to chew on. When that disappears, the space feels hollow, not because something essential is missing, but because your attention no longer has a familiar object. The emptiness isn't real. It's transitional. As time passes, something subtle begins to change. The silence no longer feels accidental. It starts to feel deliberate. You didn't disappear in panic. You didn't withdraw to punish or provoke. You simply stopped reaching into a dynamic that no longer felt aligned. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. There's a difference between absence caused by avoidance and absence rooted in self-command. One leaks insecurity. The other communicates quiet authority. This is where perception shifts, not just yours, but hers as well. At first, she may have interpreted your silence as temporary, a pause, a mood, something that would eventually resolve itself with a message, a reaction, or a familiar pattern. But as the days pass, and you don't rush to fill the gap, the meaning of that silence begins to change. What once looked like emptiness starts to feel intentional. And intentional silence is unsettling because it suggests choice rather than need. The Stoic philosopher Musonius Rufus taught that restraint reveals character more clearly than action. Anyone can act impulsively. Anyone can react emotionally. But restraint, especially when emotion is available, signals discipline. It shows that a man is not ruled by the immediate urge to fix, explain, or be seen. When you remain still, you're no longer participating in the old emotional exchange. You're standing outside it. That's when silence stops feeling like something that happened to you and starts feeling like something you chose. And this choice is what alters the emotional weight of your absence. You're no longer chasing resolution. You're no longer trying to be understood. You're simply present with yourself, calm, grounded, self-contained. The silence begins to carry a different texture, less hollow, more solid, less reactive, more final. This is the moment when silence quietly redefines the dynamic. Not through words, not through explanation, but through consistency. When you don't rush to fill the space itself becomes a signal. And that signal says more than any message ever could. Number 2. Her curiosity replaces her certainty. At the moment, she decided to step back, pull away, or end things she felt certain. Certainty gave her stability. It allowed her to organize the story in her mind. Who was in control? Who wanted more? Who would feel the impact first? Certainty doesn't require truth. It only requires predictability. As long as your reaction followed a familiar pattern, her confidence remained intact. That's why your calm matters more than anything you could have said. When you don't react the way she expected, no chasing, no emotional explanation, no visible collapse, the certainty she leaned on begins to weaken. Not dramatically, not all at once, but subtly, almost quietly. The story she told herself relied on a specific outcome: that your silence would be temporary, emotional, or charged with meaning she could interpret. Instead, she meets something unfamiliar: neutrality, stillness, composure, and uncertainty enters. Certainty is comfortable because it closes questions. Curiosity does the opposite. It opens them. Once your behavior stops confirming her assumptions, the mind begins searching for new explanations. Why isn't he reaching out? Why does he seem steady? Did I misread how much this affected him? Is he moving on, or was I wrong about his dependence altogether? These questions don't appear because she suddenly misses you. They appear because her mental framework no longer holds. The absence of predictable reaction forces her to look again. And curiosity, once activated, is far more persistent than certainty ever was. Certainty rests. Curiosity circles. This is where most men misunderstand the shift. They assume attention returns because of longing or regret. But often, it begins with confusion, a quiet disruption of expectation, the unsettling realization that the emotional equation no longer balances the way it used to. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that confusion is often the first crack in false certainty. When someone believes they understand you completely, they stop paying attention. They stop questioning. But the moment their assumptions fail, awareness returns. Your composure becomes that crack, not because it's dramatic, but because it's consistent. And consistency is what makes curiosity grow. If you had reacted emotionally, she could categorize you. If you had argued, she could dismiss you. If you had chased, she could feel reassured in her position. But calm offers no category. It gives her nothing to push against, nothing to define you by. And when the mind can't label something, it studies it instead. This is the quiet reversal. The emotional spotlight shifts, not because you demanded it, but because you removed yourself from the role she expected you to play. Curiosity replaces certainty when control dissolves, and control dissolves the moment your behavior stops confirming her internal script. You don't feel this shift immediately. She doesn't announce it, but it begins internally where all real changes start. And once curiosity takes hold, the dynamic is no longer closed, it's open. And openness is what eventually leads her to reach out, not to reclaim certainty, but to resolve the questions your silence created. Before we move on, pause for a moment and notice what's really being described here. The shift doesn't begin with action or words. It begins with the collapse of certainty. When expectations stop being met, curiosity takes over, and curiosity is what quietly reopens closed doors. That's the turning point most people miss. If this perspective resonates with you, take a second to like the video. Leave a comment sharing what stood out to you, or simply type, "My calm changes the dynamic." Then let's continue. Number 3. She begins watching instead of acting. Before she ever reaches out, something quieter happens. She stops moving and starts observing. Not deliberately, not strategically, but attentively. The kind of attention that appears when certainty slips and action no longer feels safe. She isn't planning her next move. She's reorienting. Earlier, action felt easy. Pulling away felt justified. The story made sense. But your calm disrupted that internal narrative. Movement slowed. And when movement slows, observation replaces it. She begins noticing what she hadn't before: your lack of reaction, your consistency, the absence of emotional noise. She checks, often without realizing it, for signs of wobble. Most people wobble under pressure. They chase, explain, compensate. That's the pattern she knows, but you didn't shift, and that's what holds her attention. When action feels uncertain, the mind gathers data. She watches how you carry yourself now, whether your silence feels tense or settled. Cleanthes believed discipline meant holding posture when pulled sideways, not resisting, not collapsing, simply remaining upright. You didn't stiffen or react. You stayed where you were. And emotional posture is impossible to fake over time. Sustained stillness reveals where your center of gravity truly sits. She notices the silence isn't loaded. There's no indirect messaging, no performance of absence. You're not withdrawing, you're self-contained. And that's unsettling, because it suggests your balance no longer depends on her movement. This is where many men break it by interrupting the watching, reaching out too soon, forcing clarity. But clarity comes from contrast, not pressure. Your steadiness provides that contrast. Now the roles quietly reverse. You're no longer scanning for signals, you're simply living, and that non-movement becomes the reference point. She hasn't reached out yet, because confidence hasn't returned. The old map no longer applies. So she watches the man who stayed upright while the ground shifted. This isn't the end. It's the moment awareness deepens, and awareness always comes before contact. Number 4. Emotional memory starts surfacing quietly. Before she reaches out, memory shifts in an unexpected way. It doesn't return with drama or emotional highs. It arrives quietly, through small human details, a tone of voice, a look, a moment of calm during conflict. Ordinary things that now feel heavier. This is how memory works once certainty has cracked. At first, the ending likely felt clean. Decisions were justified. Distance made sense. But your calm removed emotional noise from the ending. There was no explosion, no chaos to seal it shut. Without a sharp conclusion, the mind struggles to file the experience away. So memory reopens the file. Not out of nostalgia or romance, but because unresolved endings don't stay buried. Loud endings can be labeled and dismissed. Quiet ones can't. And what can't be categorized gets revisited. That's when smaller moments surface how safe conversations felt, how your presence didn't demand performance, how you didn't pressure or rush her emotions. Those moments didn't feel important then. But calm ages differently. Over time, it gains weight. Seneca noted that the mind returns to what ended, without resolution, not to suffer, but to understand. Your composure didn't argue its case or try to be remembered. And because of that, the ending remains psychologically unfinished. Unfinished doesn't mean open. It means unresolved internally. There's no dramatic flaw to reduce you to. No emotional debris to point at. Without closure, memory begins its quiet work sorting, comparing, re-evaluating. This doesn't feel like longing yet. It feels like interruption, a thought that appears uninvited, a subtle awareness that something ended without proving it had to. That's where your silence does its deepest work. Because you didn't plead or explain, your memory isn't tied to tension or weakness. The mind fills the space with curiosity instead of defense. You won't see this phase. There are no signals yet. But internally, the past is no longer settled. And when emotional memory resurfaces quietly, it's because the mind is preparing to revisit not the separation, but the meaning of what was lost. Number 5. Her pride enters negotiation mode. By the time pride enters the picture, something has already shifted. This is no longer about distance or moving on. The conflict is internal. Two forces begin pulling in opposite directions, and neither wants to lose. On one side is pride. It wants to preserve her self-image, composed, self-respecting, unaffected. Reaching out threatens that image. It introduces vulnerability and the risk of exposure. Pride avoids uncertainty when it can be seen. On the other side is clarity. The watching, remembering, and curiosity now demand resolution. Silence created space. Space created awareness. And awareness wants understanding. But understanding requires movement, and movement threatens pride. So negotiation begins. Not consciously, not logically, but emotionally. Pride urges restraint. Curiosity urges action. Memory adds weight. And your calm remains unchanged in the background, refusing to tip the scales. This is where hesitation forms. Hierocles spoke of harmony between impulse and reason. When they align, action is easy. When they clash, stillness appears, not peace, but tension held in balance. She feels this as indecision, a thought she can't dismiss or act on. Reaching out would satisfy uncertainty. Staying silent would protect pride. Neither option feels clean anymore, and that's the shift. Pride no longer has certainty on its side. It must negotiate with doubt, and pride weakens when it has to argue instead of declare. Your silence matters here. You didn't chase, so there's no pressure to resist. You didn't dramatize the ending, so there's no rebellion against finality. And because you stayed calm, pride can't dominate the story. Hesitation grows, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is. She doesn't yet know which version of herself will emerge, the one who stays distant or the one who reaches out. Either choice requires a shift in identity. Until that feels safe, action stalls. This is often the longest phase, and when she does reach out, it won't be impulsive. It will be the result of pride deciding it can survive clarity, or clarity deciding it's worth the risk. That decision only forms because your silence never tried to resolve the tension for her. It allowed it to exist. Pause here for a moment and let this settle. What's unfolding now isn't visible action, but internal pressure, pride no longer standing firmly on its own, and clarity refusing to stay quiet. This is the space where outcomes begin forming, long before words appear. Take a second to reflect on whether you've felt this shift in your own experience. If it resonates, leave a comment, sharing your thoughts, or simply write, "Silence reveals my strength," in the comments. Number 6. Your calm becomes the reference point. By this stage, a quiet shift has taken place. Your calm is no longer just silence, it has become a reference point. Not consciously, but subtly, she begins comparing emotional states, interactions, and even people against the steadiness you embodied when things went quiet. This isn't about excitement. Excitement is loud and unstable, full of highs and drops. What stands out now is something rarer: emotional order, a sense of balance that doesn't rely on reassurance, stimulation, or constant engagement. At first, your silence may have felt neutral, even forgettable, but over time, contrast forms. Chaos becomes obvious after calm. Inconsistency feels heavier after steadiness. Emotional noise grows tiring once you've known quiet presence. Reference points aren't created through persuasion, but through experience. She starts noticing how reactive many dynamics feel, how conversations loop without resolution, how attention often comes with tension attached. And without trying to, her mind returns to how your calm felt different. Not dramatic, not intense, just grounded, unforced, stable. That's the shift. Marcus Aurelius believed inner order radiates outward without announcement. A man who is aligned doesn't explain himself. His presence carries coherence, and coherence lingers long after words fade. Your calm wasn't situational or dependent on being chosen, so it didn't disappear with distance. It stayed. It became something the nervous system remembers. This is why your silence didn't diminish you. It clarified you. You didn't argue for your value or prove your stability. You lived it. And lived qualities don't vanish when contact ends. They become internalized. The standard is set, even if she can't name it yet. Now, other interactions feel louder, less centered, more effortful. And in those moments, your calm becomes the invisible comparison, not because you were perfect, but because you were ordered. That's also why reaching out doesn't happen immediately. Standards don't trigger action right away. They trigger evaluation. She begins noticing misalignment elsewhere, feeling friction where she once felt stimulation. Your calm now exists quietly in her inner landscape, not romanticized, recognized. And once calm becomes the reference point, the mind naturally moves toward what feels coherent, not out of longing, but out of alignment. And alignment, when it finally seeks expression, often does so through contact, not to disrupt the calm, but to return to it. Number 7. The need to be remembered emerges. At this point, the shift is no longer about you, it's about her place in your inner world. Earlier stages were driven by uncertainty and curiosity. Now, a quieter question surfaces, not about missing you, not about longing, but about significance. She begins to wonder if she still matters to you, not emotionally and not romantically, but existentially. Does she still occupy any space in your mind? Does your silence mean peace or erasure? And if it's erasure, what does that say about her impact on your life? This question arises precisely because you didn't seek reassurance. If you had reached out, explained yourself, or asked for acknowledgement, the answer would be clear. She would feel remembered, confirmed. But by not seeking validation, you removed the mirror she once used to see herself reflected in your attention. And when that mirror disappears, relevance becomes uncertain. The Stoics understood this well. Worth isn't asserted, it's recognized. Value that announces itself weakens. Value that stands quietly forces recognition. Your silence didn't ask to be seen, and because of that, it invited reflection instead of reaction. She begins to feel the absence of being important to someone who no longer seeks confirmation. This is unsettling because it reverses the emotional balance. You didn't reject her. You didn't replace her. You didn't react at all. And that neutrality creates doubt. Am I still relevant to him? This doubt isn't just ego, it's identity. When someone once attentive becomes self-contained, it forces a reassessment of one's emotional footprint. And because your calm wasn't cold but composed, the question lingers unanswered. This is where the need to be remembered quietly forms. Not to reopen the past, but to confirm that the connection left a trace that she wasn't just someone you moved on from with ease. And again, your silence is what allows this question to emerge naturally. You didn't provoke it or test her. You simply lived without broadcasting need. And in doing so, you shifted the burden of recognition inward. This is often misunderstood because men break this phase by reassuring too soon. When reassurance is given freely, the question dissolves before it's fully felt. This isn't about power or manipulation. It's about psychological gravity. When someone withdraws with dignity, they don't disappear. They become defined by their absence. And in that absence, the need to be remembered doesn't come from you. It arises within her, quietly, persistently, and unresolved until contact is made. Before we go any further, pause here for a moment. This is the point where the dynamic stops being external and becomes deeply internal, where silence is no longer something that happens between two people, but something that reshapes how value and relevance are felt. Take a breath and reflect on this shift, not just from her perspective, but from your own. What changes when you stop seeking confirmation and let your presence or absence speak for itself? If this resonates, leave a comment sharing what stood out to you, or simply write, "I choose quiet strength," below. Your reflection matters, and it sets the tone for what comes next. Number 8. She tests the emotional temperature. When contact finally begins to feel possible, it doesn't arrive as a declaration. It arrives as a test, small, indirect, almost deniable, a subtle signal that can be dismissed as coincidence if necessary. This isn't because she lacks courage, it's because pride is still present, and pride prefers safety over exposure. She isn't reaching out to reconnect yet. She's checking the environment. Has anything shifted? Has your emotional posture softened? Is there tension, warmth, indifference? Most of all, does responding feel safe? These questions don't get asked out loud. They're answered through observation of reaction, a like, a brief message, a neutral interaction, something that allows her to gather information without fully stepping forward. This is emotional temperature checking. It's not manipulation, it's caution. When uncertainty has already unsettled the internal landscape, the mind looks for low-risk data before committing to movement. She wants to know whether the space between you is cold, volatile, or neutral. And the fastest way to find out is through something small enough to retreat from. What matters here isn't the signal itself, it's how you relate to it internally. Many men misinterpret this moment as the opening they were waiting for. They rush to respond with enthusiasm, relief, or emotion. They overcorrect. They lean in. And in doing so, they collapse the very balance that created the shift in the first place. Temperature checks aren't invitations, they're assessments. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus warned that impulsive responses weaken judgment. When reaction precedes clarity, you give away your center. And center is exactly what your calm established. Your restraint here doesn't mean ignoring the signal. It means not being governed by it. Outgrowing a signal is different from rejecting it. You acknowledge without chasing. You remain grounded without performing indifference. Your response, if there is one, carries the same emotional texture as your silence. Steady, unhurried, uninvested in outcome. This is what keeps the reference point intact. And that's what she's actually testing. Not whether you'll respond, but whether your inner order remains unchanged. If the calm collapses the moment contact appears, the earlier shifts lose meaning. But if your composure holds, the signal gains weight. Because now it's clear that your steadiness wasn't situational. It wasn't dependent on distance. It's who you are. That realization deepens the internal conflict. She can't dismiss the contact as meaningless anymore. Because your response, or lack of urgency, communicates something stronger than interest or detachment. It communicates self-command. And self-command is rare enough to command attention without demanding it. This is why emotional temperature tests often come in waves. One small signal, then another. Each time, the mind recalibrates. Each time, pride negotiates. Each time, curiosity deepens. Your role isn't to interpret or react, it's to remain coherent. Because when restraint outgrows the signal either fades or evolves into something more direct. And whichever path unfolds, it happens without you needing to force clarity. That's the quiet power of this phase. You don't chase the temperature, you set it. Number 9. Fear shifts from rejection to regret. Earlier, fear worked in her favor. It created distance. It justified restraint. Fear said, if I stay back, I stay safe. Safe from vulnerability. Safe from being seen as the one who wanted more. Safe from risking rejection. That kind of fear is protective. It supports control. It keeps decisions intact. But silence changes what fear protects. When you didn't chase, didn't protest, didn't try to correct her perception, the original fear lost its function. There was nothing to defend against anymore. No pressure, no emotional pursuit, no incoming demand that required resistance. And without resistance, fear had nowhere to anchor itself. So, it adapted. Fear rarely disappears, it transforms. And now, instead of warning her about reaching out, it begins to ask a different question. What if I was wrong? Not emotionally wrong, but judgmentally wrong. What if she misread your strength? What if she underestimated your self-command? What if the calm she now recognizes wasn't weakness at all, but something she failed to value in time? This is a deeper kind of fear, because it isn't about loss of control, it's about loss of opportunity. Regret-oriented fear doesn't shout, it whispers. It appears in quiet moments, after comparison has already begun, after memory has resurfaced, after pride has stalled action long enough for doubt to mature. And unlike the fear of rejection, this fear doesn't keep distance. It creates urgency, because rejection is survivable. Regret feels permanent. The Stoics observed that fear changes shape when control is lost. As long as someone believes they are managing the situation, fear serves as a guardrail. But once control slips, once the other person no longer behaves predictably, fear turns inward. It begins questioning the decision-maker instead of the situation. Your silence removes control in the most destabilizing way. Calmly. You didn't force her hand. You didn't provoke a reaction. You didn't try to reclaim influence. You simply stepped out of the emotional feedback loop. And without feedback, her ability to assess risk collapses. There's no longer a clear signal that says, "I can still reach him anytime." That assumption dissolves, quietly but completely. Now fear shifts focus. Instead of, "What if I reach out and lose dignity?" it becomes, "What if I don't and lose something irreversible?" Instead of protecting pride, fear begins challenging it, and that's when hesitation becomes heavier. Because doing nothing no longer feels neutral, it feels like a choice with consequences. This is the point where time itself becomes pressure. She notices that the longer she waits, the less certain she feels about her place in your life. The silence hasn't frozen things, it has allowed you to move internally. And the idea that you may have moved beyond her emotional reach is what transforms fear into regret. Importantly, this fear doesn't feel dramatic. It feels reflective. It doesn't push her to act immediately, but it destabilizes the comfort of inaction. Staying silent now carries risk. And when silence carries risk, contact becomes a way to reduce uncertainty. That's the final inversion. Fear once kept her away. Now fear pulls her closer, not toward you emotionally, but toward clarity, toward resolution, toward knowing. Even if knowing comes at the cost of pride. And none of this happens because you threatened loss. It happens because your silence made loss imaginable. Number 10. She reframes the narrative internally. Before she reaches out, the story she once relied on quietly falls apart. Not all at once, not in a dramatic realization, but piece by piece, the explanation she used to justify distance stops making sense. The old narrative, "It wouldn't have worked. He wanted more than I could give. The timing was wrong," no longer fits the emotional evidence in front of her. Stories exist to protect coherence. They help the mind feel settled. When a decision is emotionally charged, the narrative supports it by smoothing contradictions. But once emotion fades and pressure disappears, those stories lose their grip, and silence accelerates that process. Your steadiness removed emotional noise from the equation. There was no conflict to revisit, no argument to replay, no reaction to reinterpret as proof. Without emotional turbulence, the mind is forced to sit with its own reasoning. And when it does, inconsistencies become visible. The certainty that once felt solid now feels constructed, defensive, incomplete. She stops explaining why it couldn't work and starts asking a quieter, more dangerous question. Why did it feel different with him? This shift matters because explanation moves outward, while questioning moves inward. Explaining preserves identity. Questioning threatens it. And your silence created the conditions where questioning could happen without interference. The Stoic philosopher Seneca believed that truth emerges when emotion quiets, not because emotion is false, but because it overwhelms clarity. When emotional intensity fades, what remains is closer to reality. Your calm didn't argue against her narrative. It simply outlasted it. Now she's alone with her own thoughts. There's no external signal to react to, no pressure to defend her decision, no emotional pull to resist. And in that stillness, the mind revisits the connection, not as a threat, but as a pattern. She notices what stood out, what felt grounded, what didn't demand performance, what didn't drain her energy. This reframing isn't nostalgic, it's analytical. The mind trying to reconcile experience with explanation and failing to fully align the two. That failure creates discomfort, and discomfort is the birthplace of revision. Importantly, this process doesn't mean she's rewriting the past in your favor. She's removing exaggeration, stripping away emotional bias, and what remains feels simpler, cleaner, harder to dismiss. Your steadiness plays a central role here because it offers no contradiction. You didn't behave in a way that reinforces the old story. You didn't spiral. You didn't resent. You didn't chase. There's nothing for the narrative to anchor itself to anymore. So it collapses under its own weight. This is often the moment when contact becomes inevitable, Not because she wants to change the outcome, but because she wants coherence. The mind doesn't tolerate unresolved contradictions for long. And once the story changes internally, action becomes a way to align reality with understanding. By staying silent, you didn't force a reframe. You allowed one to occur. And this is the point where the shift turns inward and becomes personal. When the story falls apart, the mind doesn't rush to replace it. It pauses. That pause is uncomfortable, but it's revealing. This is where reflection replaces certainty and where meaning quietly starts to rearrange itself. For you, this is also a moment worth noticing. Ask yourself what changes when you stop trying to be understood and simply remain steady. What happens when you let silence do the work instead of explanation? Take a moment to reflect on that. If something in this resonates, leave a comment, sharing your thoughts, or simply write, "I choose clarity over noise." Number 11. Reaching out feels like risk again. This is the final shift and the most revealing one. By the time she considers reaching out, the act no longer feels casual. It doesn't feel like a light check-in or a harmless message sent without consequence. It feels exposed, weighted, meaningful, and that alone tells you how much the dynamic has changed. Earlier, contact felt safe because it felt reversible. Messages could be ignored, reinterpreted, or dismissed. Distance created leverage. Silence from her side felt controlled. But now, because you didn't chase, the balance has inverted. Reaching out no longer guarantees comfort, it introduces risk. Risk to pride, risk to certainty, risk to the version of the story she's been telling herself. And risk is only felt when actions matter again. The Stoic philosopher Zeno of Citium taught that strength restores weight to actions. When a man is reactive, his actions lose gravity. They become predictable, easy to discount. But when a man is self-contained, when he doesn't move impulsively, every action around him gains significance. Silence does that. It recalibrates meaning. Because you didn't chase, contact is no longer guaranteed. That's what creates hesitation. She knows that reaching out might change something. It might expose uncertainty she's been managing internally. It might invite a response she can't control, or no response at all. And unlike before, she can't rely on your emotional availability to cushion the outcome. Your calm removed that safety net. This is where courage finally enters the equation. Not emotional impulse, not nostalgia, not curiosity, courage. The willingness to act despite uncertainty. And courage only appears when something is at stake. If contact were still casual, there would be no courage required. But now, the act carries consequence, and consequence demands intention. This is also why many men never see this moment arrive. They interrupt the process too early. They reach out first. They soften the silence. They remove the weight before it can fully form. And in doing so, they turn risk back into comfort, undoing the final shift. Your restraint prevented that. You allowed contact to regain its seriousness. You restored its cost. And when action has cost, it becomes honest. There's no room for testing, playing, or drifting. Reaching out now means choosing to step into uncertainty rather than observing it from a distance. That's the transformation silence completes. You didn't punish. You didn't withdraw to provoke. You didn't disappear to win. You simply stayed grounded long enough for meaning to return to actions. And when meaning returns, hesitation always comes first. Not because she's weak, but because the moment is real again. And real moments don't happen lightly. If she reaches out now, it won't be casual. It won't be automatic. It will be a conscious step forward. Not because you demanded it, but because your silence made it matter. As you can see, the moment she reaches out is never the beginning of the story. It's the end of a much quieter process. Long before words return, balance shifts, certainty loosens, control fades, and silence, when carried with calm and self-command, does what explanations never could. You didn't force clarity. You didn't chase resolution. You allowed space to do its work. And in that space, meaning return to actions, weight returned to contact, and choice became real again. Whether she reaches out or not, this process wasn't about waiting, it was about alignment, about staying grounded long enough for the dynamic to reveal its truth. If this resonated with you, take a moment to like the video. It helps the channel more than you realize. Leave a comment below and share what part of this shift stood out to you the most, or where you see yourself right now. And, when you're ready, watch the recommended videos on screen. They'll take this understanding even deeper.